The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Maple Street, painting the modest row of houses in warm amber hues. Marcus Rodriguez moved with practiced efficiency, his weathered hands gripping multiple grocery bags as he approached the small blue house at the end of the street. His movements were deliberate, careful, each step measured, each bag balanced with the precision of a man who understood the value of what he carried. Inside the house, his two children, Elena, 12, and Diego, 8, watched from the living room window. They knew the ritual well. Every day, around the same time, their father would return with food, somehow, miraculously, managing to provide meals despite the financial strain that had gripped their family since Marcus lost his job at the construction company 6 months ago. The neighborhood had noticed. Curtains twitched. Whispers traveled between fence lines and over garden walls. Mrs. Henderson, who lived across the street, would later tell her husband, "Something's not right. How does he keep bringing home so much food?" Marcus set the bags down in the kitchen, his hands trembling slightly. Elena quickly came to help, her young eyes taking in the assortment of groceries: fresh vegetables, bread, canned goods, pasta. She knew better than to ask questions. Their survival depended on not drawing attention, on maintaining this delicate balance they'd discovered. "Dinner's going to be good tonight," Marcus said, his voice deliberately cheerful. But there was an edge underneath, a tension that spoke of secrets and desperation. Diego bounced into the kitchen, his eyes bright. "What did you get today, Papa?" Marcus ruffled his son's hair. "Enough to keep us going," he said, a practiced smile masking the worry that constantly lurked behind his eyes. The Rodriguez family had always been private, but now they seemed to exist in a bubble of careful secrecy. Neighbors observed Marcus's daily routine, leaving early, returning with bags, never discussing work, always maintaining a facade of normalcy despite the obvious economic challenges. Mr. Thompson, who lived 2 houses down, would later recall to the local police, "It was strange. Always the same time, always those bags. Never saw him go to a job, but somehow they always had food." The whispers grew. Speculation ran wild. Some neighbors wondered if Marcus was involved in something illegal. Others imagined scenarios ranging from underground work to potential theft. The community's curiosity transformed into a low-grade suspicion that simmered just beneath the surface of polite interactions. What they didn't see was the desperation behind Marcus's actions, the sleepless nights he spent worrying about feeding his children, the constant fear of failure, of not being able to provide. Each bag of groceries represented not just food, but a small victory in an increasingly challenging battle for survival. Elena understood more than her father realized. She saw the strain in his eyes, the way his shoulders sagged when he thought no one was looking. She knew their family was walking a razor's edge, and one wrong move could send them tumbling into complete financial ruin. As evening settled over Maple Street, the Rodriguez household maintained its careful routine. Dinner was prepared, stories were shared, homework was completed. From the outside, they looked like any other family. But beneath the surface, a secret was growing, a secret that would soon dramatically change everything. The neighborhood watched, the whispers continued, and Marcus Rodriguez kept moving, one day at a time, driven by a father's most fundamental instinct: to protect and provide for his children, no matter the cost. Little did anyone know that the source of their mysterious provisions was about to be revealed, and nothing would ever be the same. The morning sunlight had barely crept through the thin curtains when a sharp, authoritative knock fractured the Rodriguez family's fragile peace. Marcus froze, the coffee pot suspended mid-air, his hand trembling almost imperceptibly. Elena and Diego exchanged worried glances, sensing the sudden tension that electrified the small apartment. Two police officers stood at the doorway, their uniforms crisp and official, casting long shadows into the modest living space. The taller officer, a broad-shouldered man with sharp eyes, spoke first. "Mr. Rodriguez? We'd like to have a word with you." Marcus swallowed hard, forcing a calm he didn't feel. "Is something wrong, officers?" The second officer, younger and more stern-faced, stepped forward. "We've received reports about your unusual circumstances." His eyes swept the room, taking in the neat but sparse furnishings, lingering on the kitchen where fresh groceries were carefully arranged. Diego, only 8 years old, pressed closer to his sister Elena, his small hands gripping her arm. Elena, mature beyond her 12 years, watched their father with a mixture of fear and protective instinct. "Unusual circumstances," Marcus repeated, his voice carefully controlled. "I'm not sure I understand." The tall officer produced a small notebook. "Neighbors have been talking, Mr. Rodriguez. You consistently bring home groceries, yet everyone knows you've been unemployed for months. People are asking questions." Marcus felt a cold sweat break out across his forehead. He was acutely aware of his children watching, of the fragile facade he'd worked so hard to maintain. "I'm doing my best to provide for my family," he said, his voice slightly defensive. "And how exactly are you doing that?" The younger officer pressed, his tone suggesting he already suspected something was amiss. The interrogation continued, with the officers circling around the central question. How was Marcus feeding his family? Each question was a subtle probe, designed to expose what they believed was a hidden truth. "We've heard rumors," the tall officer said, his voice dropping to a more serious tone, "of potential fraud or theft. We need you to explain exactly where these groceries are coming from." Marcus felt the walls closing in. His children's eyes burned into him. Diego confused and scared. Elena analytical and worried. He knew he had to choose his words carefully. "Everything I do," Marcus said slowly, deliberately, "is to protect my children. Everything." The statement hung in the air, loaded with unspoken desperation. The officers exchanged a quick glance, catching the raw emotion behind Marcus's words. The younger officer's clipboard tapped against his leg, a rhythmic sound that seemed to count down the moments of tension. "We'll need you to be more specific, Mr. Rodriguez. Where are these groceries really coming from?" Outside, the neighborhood seemed to hold its breath. Windows that had been discreetly open, curtains slightly parted, represented the collective curiosity of a community that had been whispering and speculating about the Rodriguez family's mysterious survival. Marcus looked at his children, then back at the officers. He was trapped between protecting his family's dignity and facing the potentially devastating consequences of his actions. The truth was close to the surface, ready to burst forth, but the moment of full revelation had not yet arrived. "I can explain everything," Marcus said finally, his voice steady but carrying an undercurrent of vulnerability that wasn't lost on the officers. "But not right now. Not in front of my children." The suspense thickened like fog, promising revelations that would soon change everything. The mystery of how Marcus Rodriguez had been feeding his family remained tantalizingly unresolved, hanging in the air like an unanswered question. The police officers would return. And when they did, the truth, whatever it might be, would finally come to light. The small interrogation room felt suffocating to Marcus Rodriguez. The fluorescent lights cast a harsh glare on the metal table between him and the two police officers who had brought him in after their earlier visit to his home. Detective Sarah Collins and her partner, Officer Roger, studied the worn access card that had been the source of so much speculation. "Mr. Rodriguez," Detective Collins began, her voice measured but firm, "this food bank access card doesn't match any of the registered names in our system. Care to explain?" Marcus's hands trembled slightly. He could see Elena and Diego's worried faces in his mind. Remember their hushed whispers and anxious glances during the earlier police visit. The weight of providing for his children pressed down on him like a physical burden. "I found it," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "It was just lying there on the street." Officer Roger leaned forward, his expression a mix of suspicion and something else, a hint of understanding that flickered briefly in his eyes. "Found it? So you're admitting to using a card that isn't yours?" The accusation hung in the air. Marcus felt the full weight of his desperation crash down around him. Months of unemployment, dwindling savings, the constant fear of not being able to feed his children, it all came rushing back. His voice caught in his throat before he managed to speak. "I have 2 children," Marcus said, his voice growing stronger. "Elena is 12, and Diego is 8. When I lost my job 6 months ago, everything changed. The interviews dried up, and our savings, they disappeared faster than I could have imagined." Detective Collins shuffled some papers, her initial stern demeanor softening slightly. The file before her told a story of a man who had worked steadily as a warehouse manager for 15 years before being laid off during company restructuring. "You could have gone to social services," Officer Roger suggested. Marcus let out a bitter laugh. "The waiting lists are months long. The paperwork, it takes time. My children needed to eat now, not months from now." He looked down at his hands. "I found the card on the sidewalk near the food bank. It looked like someone had dropped it. At first, I hesitated. But then I saw how thin Diego was getting, how worried Elena looked every time she tried to pretend everything was okay." The details of his struggle spilled out. How he had carefully used the card, taking only what they absolutely needed. How he had tried to be discreet, hoping no one would notice. The shame of using a found card mixed with the primal instinct of a father to protect his children. Detective Collins exchanged a look with her partner. The file told a story of a man with no criminal record, a history of steady work, now caught in the brutal grip of economic uncertainty. "You realize this is technically fraud," she said, but the words lacked their previous sharp edge. Marcus nodded, defeat washing over him. "I know. I was desperate. I never meant to steal. I just wanted to feed my children." The room fell silent. The fluorescent lights seemed to dim, casting Marcus in a softer light. No longer a suspect, but a father pushed to his limits by circumstances beyond his control. Officer Rodriguez was the first to speak. "Sometimes," he said slowly, "desperation looks different to different people." Detective Collins nodded, her professional demeanor giving way to a more human understanding. The card represented more than just a piece of plastic. It was a symbol of a father's love, of survival, of the impossible choices people make when backed into a corner. "We'll need to complete our investigation," she said finally. "But Mr. Rodriguez, this isn't as simple as a typical fraud case." Marcus looked up, a glimmer of hope cutting through the fog of fear that had surrounded him. He didn't know what would happen next, but for the first time in months, he felt something he had almost forgotten. A possibility that things might change. The troubling discovery was more than just about a found access card. It was about a community's capacity to understand, to see beyond the surface, to recognize the humanity in a desperate act of survival. As the interview concluded, Marcus wondered what would happen next. The card had been his lifeline, his secret weapon in a battle against poverty. Now that weapon had been taken away, leaving him vulnerable and uncertain. But something had shifted. The accusations, the suspicion, they now carried a different weight. And in that small interrogation room, a story of desperation was transforming into something else entirely. The fluorescent lights of the interrogation room seemed to soften as Detective Sarah Collins and Officer Roger exchanged a profound look. Marcus Rodriguez sat before them, his shoulders slumped, vulnerability etched into every line of his face. The sterile room, usually a place of judgment, had transformed into a space of unexpected understanding. "Mr. Rodriguez," Detective Collins began, her tone no longer accusatory but compassionate, "tell us more about your situation." Marcus's hands, calloused from years of hard work, trembled slightly as he spoke. He recounted the past 6 months, the sudden job loss, the mounting bills, the desperate attempts to shield his children, Elena and Diego, from the harsh realities of their financial struggle. Each word peeled back another layer of his story, revealing not a criminal, but a father driven by an unbreakable love. "I never wanted to steal," Marcus said, his voice cracking. "When I found that access card on the street, it felt like a lifeline. Elena needs new textbooks for school. Diego's growing so fast, he's always hungry. What was I supposed to do?" Officer Roger leaned forward, the hardness in his eyes gradually melting. He thought of his own children, of the lengths he would go to ensure their survival. The line between legal and moral suddenly seemed far more blurred than he'd ever imagined. Detective Collins pulled out the food bank access card, turning it over in her hands. "You understood you were using something that wasn't technically yours?" Marcus nodded, tears welling up. "Every night, I looked at my children's faces. They didn't deserve to go hungry because I couldn't find work. The job market is brutal. I've applied everywhere: construction, delivery, maintenance, nothing." The officers listened as Marcus detailed his futile job searches, the rejection letters, the incremental savings being eaten away by basic living expenses. It wasn't just a story of poverty. It was a testament to resilience. Outside the interrogation room, word began to spread. The neighbors who had previously whispered suspicions now heard the true narrative. Mrs. Henderson from next door, who had once called the police, now felt a profound sense of shame. The community's gossip machine, usually a weapon of judgment, was transforming into a conduit of empathy. "We've seen cases like yours before," Detective Collins said softly. "But rarely have we seen someone so committed to doing right by their family, even when the system seems stacked against them." Officer Roger pulled out his phone, making a quick call. When he returned, there was a hint of a smile. "I've contacted the local food bank. They're willing to work with you, Marcus. Legally establish your access. Provide some additional support resources." The weight of uncertainty began to lift from Marcus's shoulders. For the first time in months, he saw a glimmer of hope. Not just survival, but the potential for genuine support. As the conversation continued, the narrative shifted. This was no longer about a potential crime, but about a community's responsibility to support its most vulnerable members. The food bank access card, once a symbol of desperation, was becoming a key to potential redemption. "We're going to help you," Detective Collins promised. "Not just legally process this, but connect you with job training programs, social services that can provide more comprehensive support." Marcus looked up, a mix of gratitude and disbelief painting his features. The system he had feared was now extending a hand of assistance, transforming from an adversary to an ally. Outside, the first whispers of community support were already spreading. Neighbors began discussing how they could help: job leads, temporary work, support for the Rodriguez family. What had started as suspicion was evolving into genuine compassion. As Marcus left the interrogation room, he wasn't a suspect anymore. He was a father, a community member, a human being facing extraordinary challenges. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in months, it wasn't hopeless. The heartfelt revelation had changed everything, not just for Marcus, but for everyone who heard his story. The Rodriguez family's life transformed overnight, not through punishment, but through an unexpected wave of compassion that swept through their small community. Detective Sarah Collins and Officer Roger had done more than simply understand Marcus's desperate situation. They had become catalysts for change. The morning after Marcus's emotional confession, a group of local community leaders and social workers gathered at the police station. Detective Collins presented Marcus's case with a blend of professional precision and genuine empathy. "This isn't about criminalizing poverty," she explained, her voice firm yet compassionate. "This is about understanding and supporting a father who's doing everything he can to keep his children fed." At home, Marcus watched in disbelief as a series of unexpected events unfolded. First, a representative from the local food bank arrived, not to reprimand him, but to help him properly register for assistance. Elena and Diego watched curiously as the woman explained the various support programs available: job training, temporary financial aid, and consistent food support. Mr. Rodriguez's neighbor, whom he had previously only exchanged brief, awkward glances with, appeared at his doorstep with a casserole and a determined expression. "We heard your story," she said, her eyes warm. "No one in our neighborhood goes hungry alone." What started as a whisper of support soon became a community-wide movement. The local church, community center, and several small businesses began organizing a fundraiser. They created a crowdfunding campaign that quickly spread across social media, sharing Marcus's story of resilience and love for his children. Officer Roger personally helped Marcus update his resume and connected him with potential job opportunities. "Your skills matter," he told Marcus during one of their meetings. "And your determination to provide for your family? That's worth more than any single job." Elena watched her father's transformation with a mixture of pride and hope. The tension that had been etched into his face for months was slowly dissolving, replaced by something she hadn't seen in a long time: genuine smile. The fundraiser exceeded all expectations. Within weeks, they had not only raised enough money to cover the Rodriguez family's immediate expenses, but also created a fund to help other families facing similar challenges. Local businesses pledged job opportunities, and the community center offered free skills training workshops. During the fundraiser event, Marcus stood before the community, his voice trembling with emotion. "I never intended to break any rules," he said. "I just wanted to feed my children." The crowd responded with applause and understanding, transforming what could have been a moment of shame into one of collective compassion. Diego, who had been quiet through much of the ordeal, looked up at his father and squeezed his hand. "We're going to be okay, right, Papa?" Marcus smiled, truly believing it for the first time in months. "Yes, we're going to be more than okay." The food bank, moved by Marcus's story, revised some of its procedures to make access easier for struggling families. They recognized that rigid systems often failed those most in need, and Marcus's case had become a powerful example of the need for compassionate, flexible support. As weeks passed, Marcus secured a part-time job at a local warehouse, with the promise of full-time employment and potential advancement. The community continued to support him, checking in, offering help with childcare, and ensuring he had the resources to succeed. What had begun as a potential criminal investigation had transformed into a powerful narrative of community solidarity. Marcus Rodriguez was no longer seen as a suspect, but as a symbol of resilience, a father who loved his children so deeply that he was willing to risk everything to protect them. The Rodriguez family's journey became more than just their personal story. It became a testament to the power of empathy, understanding, and collective support. A reminder that in the face of systemic challenges, human connection could be the most powerful solution of all. As the sun set on their changed world, Marcus looked at Elena and Diego, feeling not just hope, but a profound sense of belonging. They were not alone. They were part of something larger, a community that had chosen compassion over judgment, support over punishment.